For my final project, I decided to look at a lot of the ways that victim blaming in sexual assault cases is taught, reinforced, and generally perpetuated, specifically within the environment of college campuses. So, what is victim blaming? It is the tendency to hold the victims of negative events responsible for the outcomes of those events. And you can see victim blaming in a number of different scenarios, but victims or survivors of sexual assault are particularly vulnerable. And unfortunately, this is pretty common in sexual assault cases, and it can take many different forms. But it's pretty common for them to get questions like, what were you wearing? Were you out drinking? Why would you walk home alone? Why would you go upstairs alone with that person? Oh, I thought you wanted to hook up with him, and things like that. Once you get on a college campus, sexual assault becomes especially prevalent. So 1 in every 5 women and 1 in every 16 men will be sexually assaulted at some point during their time in college. There are a number of factors in the continued occurrence of sexual assault, as well as a continued blaming of the victim in the aftermath, and I'm going to highlight a few in the next slides. And one of these factors are the different sexual assault prevention or education programs that colleges have students attend. Even though they generally have good intentions, one of the problems with them is that they're often combined with drug and alcohol education sessions, which kind of just reinforces the idea of, oh, rape is a risk if you decide to get drunk. And this really does contribute to victim blaming. One study actually found that the victim having consumed alcohol prior or around the time of their attack did increase the chances that they would be blamed for what happened to them. And this is going to make a particularly big difference on college campuses because almost half of sexual assaults against college-age women involve drugs or alcohol in some way, whether that's the offender using them to facilitate the attack or the victim being unable to consent because they willfully consumed drugs or alcohol and couldn't consent. Times they'll often include preventative measures or steps to keep yourself safe that you can take, like always use the buddy system or choose a well-lit path when you're walking at night, and a bunch of other things that basically, again, teach you don't get raped. It's also common for colleges to teach students about bystander intervention, which is definitely not the same thing as victim blaming, or at least not putting the responsibility on the victim themselves. However, it's still not putting the responsibility on the offender, and it's not teaching anyone to not even try to commit sexual assault in the first place. And on top of that, when bystander intervention fails or just completely doesn't happen at all, the default, again, is usually the victim for putting themselves in that situation. So why did you go there without a friend? Or why did you go to that place where all the guys are creepy? You should have known no one was going to help you. Then, when they do try to teach something along the lines of don't rape, such as teaching about consent and what isn't okay, this might be done with good intentions to try and make things more engaging, but a lot of the times the way they do it ends up making a joke out of the situation. So the tea video that I saw during my freshman orientation, I actually specifically remember other students laughing when they got to the parts about you wouldn't pour tea down someone's throat if they were sleeping. So I really don't think it had too much of a positive impact. There are also a lot of other factors in the campus environment that contribute to the issue and contribute to rape culture. Hookup culture, for one, is pretty common on college campuses. That might lead some people to believe, oh, why wouldn't this random person that I don't know want to hook up with me? It's totally normal. Or even some people being under social pressure to have sex with more people. A study also showed that the victim's sexual history can make a difference in their likelihood of being blamed for what happened to them. So the hookup culture, again, is kind of tied in with that. It might lead to people having more sexual partners in their lifetime and therefore being seen as, oh, she deserves it or he deserves it. The gender roles, with the division by gender among different majors or fraternities, sororities. I know athletic teams sometimes get special treatment in college, so that might make athletes feel they're more entitled to other things, including sex. So as far as the sociological implications, one, this is a good example of social constructs, especially like the sexual history or virginity. We really made that up, and it shouldn't make anyone more guilty. Well, no victim is guilty, but it shouldn't make anyone more deserving or undeserving of a horrific assault that they have or haven't had sex and things like that. Also, it's kind of just victim blaming is an entire extra victimization. In addition to being victimized by their offender, they're now victimized by society. Also, since this is such a gendered crime and it's almost always perpetrated by men and usually perpetrated against women, this response to it and just the way we handle sexual assault on college campuses in general really does exaggerate or will continue to exaggerate the gender inequality that we have. As far as what's at stake if we don't do anything about this, a lot. So the victim's mental health and overall well-being is already going to be fragile and negatively impacted enough by their attacker, and they don't need an extra victimization from society. Also, if we continue to let it slide and make jokes out of it and not hold offenders accountable, that has some really negative implications for the future and trying to prevent it and keep everyone safe and mentally healthy, physically healthy. Also, victim blaming, especially by the system and officials and other people like that, really does minimize the integrity or the trust, at least, that a lot of people have in the criminal justice system legally and even the campus disciplinary systems. So to make those better, we really have to do something about this.